Blaine, I'll start with you. Just in a very short summation, or one phrase or even one word, describe yesterday and really the first round of the college football playoff to me.
Sucked. I mean, it sucked. It was four terrible football games. I mean, I guess the Clemson, somewhat Texas game got close. Is this what the committee wanted? No, absolutely not. If you're a sports fan, if you're a college fan, is this what you wanted? No, but sometimes in sports this happens. You look at the NFL, you can see point margin there. Did I expect certain teams to show up better than they did? Yeah, I mean, especially we can walk down the Tennessee route. I know we're going to talk about that, but I mean, it just wasn't great in my opinion. There wasn't a lot of close games, but sometimes in sports you just have blowouts, and sometimes you want the underdog to be good. Sometimes they're not, and I think you saw that with all the favorites basically covering the spread.
What do you think, Coney?
Well, look, the inaugural weekend of the 12-team playoff should have been cause for celebration. We got top teams from each conference playing each other in home environments. And instead, I'll tell you, I think the real winner this weekend was the NFL, but not because the games weren't close. We see blowouts in playoff games every single year in college. I see blowouts in the playoffs every year in the NFL. For most of my life, Super Bowl games have been lopsided. It's not because of that. It's because I don't think college football fans have the patience to deal with an expanded playoff to create the type of parity that the sport needs. And all of this infighting between conferences and fans and networks, it's all really good for the NFL. Now, I hope that I'm wrong, because I hope this is just like a healthy display of passion, right, that we saw on social media and saw on all the networks. But you have to understand, like, the average college football fan doesn't love all of college football. They just love their one team. And the NFL doesn't really have that problem because of fantasy football. Everyone is engaged with their fantasy football roster, every player across every team. And I can just sort of see the writing on the wall here. We used to have standalone bowl games, and everyone loved those, right? It was a great time, but we had multiple national champions in the same year, like Nebraska and Michigan. People hated that. So we moved to a BCS system where the computer decided. Auburn 2004 goes undefeated. Everyone hates that. Last year, when we have a playoff system, the committee says, I'll play the bad guy. I'll put Alabama in so we have a better Rose Bowl matchup, which is exactly what we got. Everyone hated them. And this year, they triple it in size and say, well, certainly everyone's going to be happy when we have 12 teams, right? No one's going to be disappointed. And we've seen more vitriol this weekend than we have ever before. So I think that what they're going to do is go to 16, and they're going to say, we're just going to create some participation trophy spots so that everyone can get in, everyone can be happy. And then they're probably going to take the home field games away from us and say, well, that was just too advantageous and the weather was too cold. We're going to move them back to the NFL stadiums. So the NFL owners will win, the NFL will win, Roger Goodell will win, all because college football fans can't be grateful.
Yeah, and look, I think the answer to me, if you're just a college football fan in general, maybe not someone that is unbelievably locked into the sport at all times, but just enjoys it overall, I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. Back to what Blaine said, in sports, blowouts happen. But the odds of them happening in every single game that we had in this first round, I think, doesn't speak to coincidence or doesn't speak to, just a random draw of the ball out of the lottery bucket. And we've said this, and I've said it for multiple weeks. I think structurally, the way we picked the 12 is unbelievably flawed. I think it's incredibly flawed, and that showed its head every single time you turned a game on this weekend. Now, does that mean going forward that we won't have blowouts in games in early rounds? No, we see it in college basketball all the time. Most of the games in the first round of college basketball, especially when you're a 4 seed and up, ends up being a blowout. So I don't think you're going to eliminate blowouts or eliminate teams playing bad. And I understand the argument that some people will have and say, oh, well, Tennessee got blown out too. Tennessee's in the SEC. You can't say Alabama would have done good. Tennessee beat Alabama up. So I can understand that argument. But to me, until we have, and look, can 12 teams win the national championship every year? No. One of the biggest things that we talked about was this year the anomaly? Because going into it, we're like, look at all these teams that we think can win a national championship. Is there an elite team out there, or are there just a couple really good teams? Well, turns out yesterday, there may not be as many out there that can actually win it as we thought, especially if Ohio State's going to play that way. So until we change the structure, in my opinion, of how we pick the 12 teams and get a committee together that understands what they're looking at, you are going to have this type of problem. And when you give automatic bids to conference championship winners of, we'll see with Boise State, of the Mountain West and some of these smaller ones, don't be surprised if you see blowouts happen in the second round. Blaine, what did you say the spread was for Penn State Boise?
Technically, some spreads are worse in the second round than what they are in the first round. I mean, Texas is a 13.5-point favorite against Arizona State, and Penn State's a 10.5-point favorite against Boise.
I mean, we got 2 double-digit spreads going into the second round, and we'll see if they're blowouts. But I just think structurally, and I know we don't all three agree on what ingredients need to go into the cake, but we all realize that the cake that's coming out of the oven isn't as perfect as it could be. Nothing will ever be perfect. But again, I just think the way we go about picking the 12 is flawed, and that reared its head yesterday.
Well, we've never seen a year where even 6 teams we thought could win the national championship.
True.
Realistically. So in the first year where we double the size of even that pool and we go to 12, I'm confused as to why other people are confused that we had first round blowout games. I mean, it's the first round. That's where you're supposed to have the most lopsided games as you move forward in a tournament, and there creates more parity. That's what I'm confused with. So if the argument is we just don't have 12 teams that can compete for a national championship, they can't, the 11, 12, 13, 14, they're just not as good as 1, 2, 3, 4. Historically, that's been the case throughout college football. Then what does it matter what the picking mechanism is, right? Like you said, I mean, I would have rather seen Alabama go play Penn State. I would have rather seen that. Now, that may have had detrimental effects for the sport moving forward. If you tell someone like Indiana, who only has 1 loss, or, the SMU one was weird because they did have a conference championship loss on top of the loss to BYU. We would have all rather seen that. But like you said, well, Tennessee went and got blown out too. How are you going to keep a 10-2 Tennessee out? So if the problem is we just don't have 12 teams that can actually create competitive football games, because this isn't basketball, this isn't a different sport, then what's it going to help to change the picking mechanism?
Yeah, well, we all agree, I think, that 12 teams were not able to win the national championship this year. I think we've all agreed on that. That's why, I go back and, some people think 8's too big of a number, right? That's why I landed on 8, because the odds of having that many teams that can win a national championship are slim to none. And we thought this may be the anomalous year. This may be the year where it happens. But again, where I think it is screwed up, and where I think it really rears its head, is, it would be different to me if the 1 through 4 teams played yesterday and didn't get a bye. Not that I believe they're the top 4 teams, but the way it should be is that if the 1 through 4 teams played yesterday, and if they blew out whoever they were playing, right? Like, one blew out the last seed, we'd expect that. But what happened in the 8-9 game? Right? What happened in some of these matchups that we thought, like, hey, look, we thought SMU was going to lose to Penn State. We didn't think they would get smushed like that, and we're going to go in that game breakdown. Same thing with Tennessee. Same thing, you look at Indiana, Notre Dame. Some people thought Indiana didn't deserve to be in there. That game wasn't pretty. Turns out the Indiana Notre Dame game outside of Texas Clemson was the best game we were going to have all weekend. And that one wasn't really close throughout. So there's some change I think you can make to help it. But at the end of the day, man, Blaine, like, there's not going to be 12 teams that can win it, and you don't need to be
right
shocked
now.
if there's, not right now, but it is what it is, man.
Well, I'm currently fighting against the elements as well here, against the sun. We'll see how this goes. I love how we
good luck, Icarus.
I didn't know I was ascending into heaven as the show started, but I will say this. I watched the Notre Dame Indiana game. The winner of that game, I didn't look at Notre Dame like, wow, they're a really good football team. I watched the Penn State SMU game. I looked at Penn State. I'm like, I didn't say, wow, they're a really good football team. I didn't think Penn State played great. I didn't think Notre Dame played great. I watched that Tennessee Ohio State game. I said, wow, that's a national championship looking football team right there. That's the Ohio. There's a reason why I picked these guys to win a national championship. I've been waiting for them to play like this. They played like who Ohio State is supposed to play. You played like you had a $20 million roster. You didn't try to beat teams the way other teams beat them. You beat them how Ohio State should beat them. If anything, I looked at Ohio State and I said, wow, that's what it's supposed to look like. I didn't see that from Notre Dame, and I didn't see that from Penn State.
Well, and look, I want to get into the Tennessee Ohio State game here in a second. Excuse me, but let's hop in the chat here real quick.
All right,
Well, I
Chad,
just want to ask you guys just
Go
one
ahead.
question before you go to the chat. Because, Jake, one of the most important points you made to me when we met years ago when you and I were discussing playoff expansion, and I was telling you, like, hey, there aren't more than 4 teams that can win the national championship. And you said, yes, but this could create parity. We have a chicken and the egg situation here, guys. And I just want to ask you, like, is it better to go ahead and give us an expanded playoff now where we may have very lopsided round 1 games for several years in a row, but that helps these smaller schools go and recruit in the transfer portal and go recruit high school players, just like you pitched me on, Jake, a few years ago, so that we do have more parity in the sport, which I think the sport needs? Or what's the alternative? We could have a 14 playoff. What would be the alternative this weekend like we've had? We could have a 14 playoff, which we would all still be really excited about. I love the sport. I'm going to watch whatever they put in front of us. We could have a 14 playoff, in which case the Buckeyes and Tennessee wouldn't be in there, and they would have been playing that game yesterday in a bowl game, right? The Meineke, Car Care, whatever, Pop-Tarts Bowl, on a neutral site with a bunch of opt-outs. Instead, we got to see them both go full board at a home stadium with their players playing, and it still ended up being a blowout. But isn't that better than going and watching a neutral site game?
Oh, no, and 100%. And I think you said something at the beginning, David, that, needs to resonate with college football fans. And that word is patience, right? Like it wasn't, sometimes it takes a while to build something in the best way possible. Let's go and say, just living in reality, they're not going back from 12. They're not going to go from 12 to 10 or 12 to 8 or 12 to 4. It's going to stay at 12 and then expand. But I still believe, and I think you saw this a little bit with the 14 playoff, looking at this season, and I know NIL has an effect. I know the transfer portal has an effect to kind of even out the parity, even though the rich are going to get richer, but the rich can get richer and the poor can become middle class at the same time. In the college football world, that can happen. Maybe not in the real world, but in the college football world, that can happen. And I do believe now, look at what SMU has to pitch in recruiting. Rhett Lashley can now go in there and say, hey, we made the college football playoff. We played awful. We didn't play very good, but we went and played Penn State on the road in the college football playoff. That legitimizes us. That validates us in the eyes of some of these recruits that we used to not be able to get. Look at Arizona State and Kenny Dillingham. Look at Boise State right now and Spencer Danielson being able to say, hey, we not only did we get in the playoff, we got a bye. Heck, there's only one SEC team that got a bye. We got the same amount of byes as the SEC did. So why would you not come play at Boise State? So I do think over time it's going to have that effect. But the patience of the college football fan, not that they're going to have any control over it. They're going to watch anyway, and they're not going to change anything at the committee. I think the patience of the college football fan doesn't match up with what's going to happen down the road. Now, that doesn't mean everybody's going to be great and we're all going to live in Rainbow Land and eat lollipops and Lucky Charms and sing Kumbaya with bayonets and violins. That doesn't mean that's going to happen. But I do think it is going to be able to rise rising tide lifts all ships. Yeah. And we've even seen that a little bit this year. So on one hand, Cone, I agree with you. College football fans are not patient enough to let this thing work out the way I think it's going to work out. But I still believe, even at 12 teams, when I wanted 8, that it may even speed up the process, that it will lead to more parity. And I think we're already seeing it right now.
This idea that the committee can just deliver like guaranteed tight games is absurd. I mean, I watched the Dolphins go on the road and play the Chiefs in the first round of the playoffs last year. It was an absolute disaster. How many teams could have played the Chiefs tighter than the Dolphins? Who else are you going to put in? They earn their way. I don't know.
This is why you have referees to keep games close.
Yeah, we saw that a little yesterday too.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, you talking about Tennessee with that roughing the passer?
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Sing Kumbaya with bayonets and violins.
Yeah, a bayonet's an instrument. Yeah, bayonet's an instrument. It's not just something you right. It's not just something you stab somebody with.
What does it sound like?
Fighting in the old.